From the mid-1800s to the early 1900s, circus sideshows were where people went to stare at what they didn't understand. Human oddities, animal deformities, and outright hoaxes were all packaged as entertainment, and it worked. Performers with rare conditions or weird talent made a living by becoming the attraction, because the alternative was often worse. But as science explained the unexplainable and public opinion shifted, these performers weren't celebrated anymore. They were quietly erased. These are the bizarre circus freaks history tried to bury. Number 15. The Pretzel Man. Hugh Bailey came into life in 1935 with limbs that seemed twisted by design, bent, curved, and capable of movement few could imagine. Sideshow promoters called him the Pretzel Man or the Crawfish Boy, names meant to shock, but Hugh turned them into a job. Traveling across America with circuses and fairs, he used his contorted body like choreography, crawling and balancing with precision that mesmerized every crowd. What others saw as deformity, he shaped into grace. His control was deliberate, his motions strangely elegant. In the 1970s, he appeared in the cult film The Mutations, where his quiet presence carried more weight than dialogue ever could. Afterward, he slipped from public sight, with stories saying he retired to live privately. However it ended, Hugh Bailey's story was never about pity. He didn't fit the world's mold, so he remade it around himself, proof that beauty can twist itself out of what others call strange. Number 14. The Great Zadma. Daniel P. Mannix lived the kind of life most writers only dream about. He was a sword swallower, fire eater, magician, and author rolled into one. Under the name The Great Zadma, he performed in carnivals, but his real magic was storytelling. With a journalism degree from Penn, Mannix wrote over 30 books, jumping from topics like gladiators to animal training. His adventures took him from American farms to African jungles, where he hunted and photographed wildlife for zoos and magazines. He later wrote Step Right Up, his memoir about the sideshow world and those about to die, which inspired Gladiator decades later. His other works included The Fox and the Hound, The History of Torture, and The Wolves of Paris. He loved danger, history, and curiosity in equal measure. Mannix died in 1997, leaving behind a life that defied every label, a performer, scholar, and daredevil whose stories never stopped breathing. Number 13. The Lady Sword Swallower. Esteline Pike was born in 1908, named after a Texas town, and raised in Kansas. Her story began when a traveling sword swallower named Lucky Ball rolled through town. They married, and he taught her his act, turning her from a small-town girl to a touring sensation. Together, they performed across state fairs and carnivals before splitting a decade later. Esteline later married Blackie Pike, who died in 1944, but she never left the stage. By the 1950s, she had carved her name into circus history, performing at Hubert's Museum in New York and with Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey. She even appeared on What's My Line in 1958. By the late 60s, she slowed down, working as a cashier but occasionally returning to perform. Esteline stayed active into her later years, bridging the gap between classic sideshow and its modern revival. When she passed in 1990, she left behind a legacy sharper than any blade she swallowed. Number 12. Gabriel Estevan Monjan. Gabriel Monjan came into the world in 1944 in the quiet district of Manjacaze, Mozambique. From early childhood, his body began a climb that it would never stop. An overactive pituitary gland triggered gigantism, and by 17, Gabriel already stood close to 8 feet tall. His size soon drew the attention of promoters, and he joined a Portuguese circus where posters claimed he was 8 feet 8 inches just to pack the tents. When Guinness World Records officially measured him in 1987, he was a fraction over 8 feet. the tallest living man on record at the time. But fame couldn't soften the strain of his condition. Constant fatigue, aching joints, and curious eyes followed him everywhere. He lived a life both celebrated and difficult. In January 1990, at just 45, he died after falling down the stairs of his home. Gabriel Monjane's legacy still stands tall, a man who lived high above the world yet never fully fit inside it. Number 11. The world's greatest showman. Bobby Reynolds didn't just live the sideshow life, he embodied it. Born in 1931, he grew into one of the last true showmen, carrying the torch between the old circus days and the modern revival. He learned his craft at Hubert's Museum in New York, mastering talk, fire-eating, sword-swallowing, and ventriloquism. By the 50s, his banners read, "The world's greatest showman," and honestly, it wasn't far off. Reynolds ran his own shows at Coney Island and toured with his bizarre exhibits: two-headed pickled twins, tattooed dogs, and even what he called Bigfoot's finger. He wasn't just selling shock. He was selling wonder. In the 90s, he sparred publicly with Dick Zygon, another Coney Island icon, and the media couldn't get enough. Though functionally illiterate, Reynolds was sharp, funny, and magnetic. Until his death in 2025, he kept pitching stories that blurred truth and showmanship, because to Bobby, they were the same thing. Number 10. The Brothers Magri. The Magri brothers, Count Primo and Baron Magri, were Italian little people who built remarkable careers in the 19th century circus world. Count Primo, also known as Count Rosebud, stood just 2 feet 8 inches and became the second husband of Lavinia Warren, widow of the legendary General Tom Thumb. His brother, whose name alternated between Giuseppe and Ernesto, was billed as Baron Magri, or Baron Littlefinger. Together, they created an act that blended humor, refinement, and the charm that captivated Victorian audiences. They performed before royalty, toured internationally, and represented the elegant side of sideshow performance. In later years, Primo and Lavinia retired to Middleborough, Massachusetts, running a small tourist attraction that welcomed travelers for decades. Behind the glitz, their lives spoke of resilience. People defined by size who refused to be small in spirit. The Magris turned novelty into livelihood, proving that love and wit could outlast any gawking crowd. Number 9. The Panther Woman. Irma Lustau's beauty didn't come from perfection, it came from pattern. This French performer, active in the early 20th century, had natural markings across her pale skin, dark spots that earned her the names Die Panther Dame in Germany and the Leopard-Spotted Lady in France. A thick band of dark hair framed her head like a crown, adding to her exotic stage appeal. Unlike many who hid their differences, Irma used hers as armor. European audiences were fascinated, not by shock, but by the way she owned the spotlight. Her movements were controlled, elegant, and self-assured, less a display of oddity than a masterclass in confidence. Irma didn't let the crowd define her. She defined how they saw her. Every performance carried quiet defiance, proof that uniqueness could be power, not shame. Though little survives about her later years, Irma Lustau remains remembered as a performer who made mystery look like poise. Number 8. The Memphis Giant. Giselle Willie Camper came into life in 1924 near Memphis, a young man advertised as a giant before he even reached adulthood. Posters stretched his height to 8.5 feet, pure showman's exaggeration, though he was still immense by any standard. His size earned him a place with Wallace Brothers Circus and Bantley's American shows, where crowds lined up to stare at the Memphis Giant. The road offered promise, but proved short. In 1943, while performing in Martinez, Willie collapsed mid-show and died from a heart attack. He was only 20. For a man hyped as larger than life, his story was heartbreakingly brief. His obituary read like a carnival act: boastful claims, uncertain truth, and mystery about his real height. Yet those who saw him remembered the awe, not the inches. Willie Camper's legacy isn't about measurement, but presence. A kind, gentle soul whose brief spark still glows in circus memory. Number 7. Schlitzie the Pinhead. Schlitzie stood just under 4 feet tall, his small head and narrow features the result of microcephaly. Promoters gave him cruel titles like The Last of the Aztecs and What Is It? Yet audiences adored him from the moment he smiled. Behind the posters and gawking, Schlitzie was pure joy, curious, kind, and full of wonder. He performed with Ringling Bros, Barnum and Bailey, and on Coney Island's sideshows, chattering happily with anyone who approached. In 1932, he appeared in Todd Browning's Freaks, the film that forever etched his image into pop culture. Offstage, he lived among caretakers who treated him as family, and he returned that care tenfold. Schlitzie loved simple things, music, parades, and applause. He may have been marketed as a curiosity, but his heart made him unforgettable. Decades later, his memory still reminds us that joy can outshine cruelty, and innocence can survive even the harshest spotlight. Number 6. The Modern Bat Boy. Talon Crawford came into the world in 1975, small in stature but full of self-awareness, in a world that rarely showed kindness to differences. Standing 3.5 feet tall, with sharp facial features that earned him the nickname Bat Boy, he decided early on that mockery wouldn't break him, it would pay him. Embracing the title, he stepped into the modern-day sideshow scene, carrying on the tradition of performers who turned their uniqueness into art. His humor, stage presence, and honesty gave his act a quiet dignity. By 2005, he'd had enough of the spotlight and walked away from the carnival circuit. He married Roxy, became a father, and settled in Washington, trading applause for peace. That life, far from the noise, proved his greatest act of all. Talon Crawford remains one of the last true links to the classic freak show world, a man who turned curiosity into control and left on his own terms. He was a real guy. Number 5. The Camel Girl. Ella Harper's life began in Tennessee in 1870, where she was born with a condition called congenital genu recurvatum, causing her knees to bend backward. The unusual posture made standing painful, so she learned to move on all fours, graceful, balanced, and fast. Promoters saw profit in her uniqueness, and by 16, Ella joined W. H. Harris's nickel-plate circus as the Camel Girl. Posters showed her beside a real camel, turning her difference into a spectacle. But Ella's story took a different path than most. After only 1 season on the road, she left performing behind, choosing education over exhibition. She used her earnings to study, determined to live life on her own terms. Few details survive about her later years, but her decision to walk away was its own act of strength. Ella didn't let the circus define her. She used it as a stepping stone to independence, turning what other stupids mocked into quiet courage. Number 4. The Bearded Lady Reborn. Vivian Wheeler entered the world in 1948 with intersex traits, and doctors made decisions that shaped her life before she could speak. They removed her male organs and raised her as female, unaware she carried a family trait, the same heavy beard worn by her mother and grandmother. As a child, she was placed in sideshows, her face displayed as a spectacle. Later, she tried to shave, marry, and live quietly, but her relationships unraveled. 2 children came from her marriages, both delivered by cesarean, both later adopted out. By the 1980s, Vivian reclaimed her image, performing again under the name Melinda Maxey. Her beard, grown long and regal, earned her multiple Guinness World Records as the world's longest bearded woman. In 2010, headlines erupted when her biological son found her after decades apart. Adopted son discovers his mother is a bearded lady. Today, Vivian Wheeler stands as proof that self-acceptance can rewrite the script of exploitation. All right, guys, now let's head over to number 3, the Danish strongman. Rasmus Nielsen treated pain like performance art. This heavily tattooed Dane, covered in ink from skull to heel, turned his body into a moving exhibition. But the real shock came from what he could do with it. Rings pierced through his chest, nose, and tongue, not for decoration, but for lifting. Audiences watched in disbelief as he hoisted anvils weighing hundreds of pounds from his own body, growling through each stunt like a man possessed. He toured under names like the Scandinavian Strongman and the Tattooed Waterman, appearing with Barnum and Bailey and Ripley's Believe It or Not. Some thought him insane, others called him a pioneer of body modification before the term existed. He blurred the line between endurance and obsession, and he knew it. Long after his strongest days, he lived quietly into the 1950s, remembered by sideshow historians as one of the first men to turn self-inflicted pain into public art. Number 2, the Ohio Giant. Well, who doesn't know this amazing guy? Noah Orr arrived in 1836 in the farmlands of Ohio and grew into one of the tallest performers of his era. Standing 7'3" in his socks and nearly 9 feet in full costume, he became a natural wonder. The 1850s brought him to P.T. Barnum's American Museum, where his calm demeanor and towering figure drew thousands. His fame carried him across America and Europe as the Ohio Giant, a title that made him both admired and pitied. Later, he joined the Lilliputian Opera Company, a troupe of little people performing Jack the Giant Killer, a promoter's dream of contrasts. Crowds laughed, cheered, and paid to see what seemed impossible. Yet off-stage, Orr was known not for spectacle, but kindness. He returned to Marysville, Ohio, where he died in 1882 at 46. His gravestone still calls him a giant, but his story endures for something bigger, grace within enormity. Number 1, Jack Earl. Jack Earl, whose real name was Jacob Elric, started life small, barely 4 pounds at birth in 1906, but by 10 years old, he was already towering past 6 feet. His growth never stopped, eventually reaching over 8.5 feet tall because of acromegalic gigantism. Childhood wasn't kind. Strangers gawked, kids threw stones, and he spent years hiding behind humor to protect himself. Yet Jack wasn't only tall, he was talented. He painted, wrote poetry, and carried himself with surprising gentleness. Hollywood took notice in the 1920s, and Hal Roach Studios signed him for what was supposed to be one film. It turned into 14 years of steady work in comedy shorts and features. On set, his calm wit made him beloved. Off-screen, he spoke openly about cruelty and isolation, using humor to make peace with it. Declining health ended his career by the 1940s, and he passed in 1952, tall in stature but larger still in spirit. If you've enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.